Mars in Gemini in the birth chart is really, really flexible and agile and all those kind of things like that. It can really, really use its words with a lot of power, with a lot of strength, with a lot of energy and drive into exactly what it chooses to do. It needs stimulation, it needs variety, it needs all these kind of things to keep it going, to keep it interested, to keep things fresh in its mind and in its life with whatever it is doing and whatever endeavor it goes in its life. And so, in this episode of the Cosmic Sky Podcast, I will be talking about Mars in Gemini in depth, really delving into this placement and what it means in the natal birth chart. Now, I personally have this placement, so I relate to a lot of the things about this particular placement, although I had the Mercury and Taurus really committing, focused on one goal, following through on that one goal, really putting my attention and energy on that goal really strongly and staying the course of it. But I do relate to the Mars in Gemini dynamic. And, one of the things I, came across when it comes to Gemini, Mars in Gemini, kind of was very blowing to the ego. And I'm going to get into that little detail toward the end of this video. It's a shadow of Mars in Gemini that I want to discuss. But, the last Mars video that I did, my editing software was in this funny rendering mode and I didn't know how to get it off. And so all of a sudden I uploaded the video and created the video, and it was zoomed in really badly. And so I'm not going to redo that video. I've already posted it. It is what it will be. And this video will be better than that. And I know that setting now, so I won't have that same mistake again. But so, delving into Mars in the sign of Gemini in the birth chart. Mars is the planet of what you're driven towards. It represents your actions. It represents your motivations. What you feel, how you want to assert yourself in your life. How you want to go after your goals and be courageous and be really willing and daring to go after these goals. So Mars in Gemini, and I'm going to get to my Sun in Aries on tomorrow's conversation and the podcast. But so Mars in Gemini isn't just focused on one thing at a time. So we have to understand about Mars in Gemini. It's focused on many different types of things. Many different kinds of things. Many subject matters, many areas of interest, many areas of intellectual interest, many areas of whatever interests you choose to move your mind into. And so, Mars in Gemini really has a lot of unique interests. And a lot of versatile interests, and a lot of all these kind of things like that make it the way that it is. So you can really be interested in one thing and then interested in another thing at the same time. It can have multiple interests. That's the thing with Mars and Gemini to really keep in mind, is the multiple interests in what you're doing. In what you are acting on. So there is this quality to Mars and Gemini that is, tends to take on a lot of things at once. Tends to do the dishes over here. It's very good at multitasking. Very good at having the pot of tomato sauce bubbling while the pasta's going, while this pot of vegetables are going in the kitchen. Like cooking involves a lot of multitasking because you have to manage multiple different kinds of things at once. Gemini is really skilled and really does well in that area. And also, just other examples of this would be learning about different subjects at once and having different projects at once. And so it can get itself into situations where it bites off more than it can chew with taking on so many different things and not committing to one or two things. Because, it is, the way it is with what it does and, really how it is for itself in its own life. So, it's interested in and driven towards different kinds of things, towards all different kinds of subject matters, all the subject matters, history, astrology, philosophy, this book on this subject, that book on that subject, that novel and that novel. Sometimes can start a lot of novels and not finish them. That's something to be said about Mars in the sign of Gemini. And so it's interested in many, many different things. That's the real key with this placement. Now, they're very, very unfamiliar, with what it means to start something. One of the areas of growth for Mars and Gemini is to actually start something. Start a project, start a goal, start an ambition, start something that they are trying to achieve in their life and follow through with it. To really, really commit to it and see it through, because Gemini has this tendency of getting bored really, really easily and giving up because, I'm so stimulated and it's so fun and interesting and it's so exciting and it's so entertaining, and then, the energy dies out and then you're moving on to something else, and then the whole cycle just keeps on going. So, this is sort of the pitfall that it can get into with, with being really, really, really not familiar with seeing something and, doing something and completing it. Now, Mars in Gemini, isn't narrow-minded. It is not narrow-minded. It's very, very open-minded, very, very diverse in terms of all these different subjects, all these different areas of study. And it does give back, get back to whatever it does eventually. It sort of does something else, comes back to it, goes here and there, like a butterfly, like flitting like the butterfly goes from one flower to another. With the twins rule by Gemini, the dual nature of Gemini, and the butterfly doesn't stay in one flower, it goes from one flower to the next. So in the same way, Mars in Gemini can have this quality of moving from one thing very, very easily in this way. So it moves about effortlessly in its own life. There's an effortless quality to Mars in Gemini. And it moves easily from one place to another. It's very, very mobile. It's very, very, movable from one place to another place. It's very, very good and easy at moving from these places, and it finds a way of coming back to that place that it was at previously. And so it does one thing, doing one thing at a time for Mars and Gemini, really, really holds back the curiosity of Mars and Gemini. Like, Mars and Gemini constantly needs to be curious, constantly needs to be on the move, doing whatever it wants to do when it wants to do it, being free and spontaneous to move from one place to another. And, Mars in Gemini is incredibly curious. It's very, very curious and open-minded towards what it is deciding to do, wanting to explore these different things, wanting to learn all these different things. And really, really with that energy, really, really strongly. It will do more things at one time. It'll do more than one thing at one time. It'll easily take on this project and another project at the same time. It's very, very known for that, especially because it wants to prove how capable it is. Especially because Mars in Gemini is all about how you are, your most capable self, with what you're doing. So there's this kind of tendency here with needing to prove how smart, how strong, how clever you are through your words and through your, what you say and how it sort of gets out into the world. It wants to find the right words. Mars and Gemini individuals want to find the right words to say, the right words that can articulate exactly what it's feeling, exactly what it's thinking. It needs the words because it needs something to articulate. It needs something to, Mars and Gemini need something to communicate to. It needs that with what it does. It wants to be able to articulate it very, very well. It's sharp and agile. That's how it is. And agile is a word, it means quick. Thinking very, very adaptively, thinking on your feet. That's what it means to be agile. So I just thought that I would clarify that before moving on. So now that I clarified that, it is a way of saying, the right thing in order to get what it wants. Mars and Gemini can convince somebody very, very easily of something. They can convince people to do things, to do things for them, because they can tap into their minds. They have the gift of the gab. They have the right words, the right message, the right tone, the right style of wording, the right choice of wording, the right phrasing that can make it so articulate where the person understands it, and is on their side, like they're very, very clever, and they sort of do, all these acrobatic sort of thing in their minds, because their minds are really, really active, and they use their minds to get their way. They use their intellect to get their way. And so they are really, really adaptable. They're very versatile. And I'm going to get into the adaptability piece in just a second. But it knows to say to get that piece of that pie. If it wants the pie, it's going to tap into, the right words, the right mind, to be able to do it really. So, it's a very, very adaptable placement. It's really, really adaptable. It can do a lot of different things, once that can, it is like a chameleon. Gemini is like a chameleon. It can move from one thing to another very, very well. It can, just change really, really easily. We'll read into the certain subject at a certain time, read into that certain subject at this certain time, and say the right words that is tailored specifically and meant specifically for that location, for that instance, for that circumstance. And so it spends a lot of time, finding the right words and the right way of expressing these words. So, there is this quality with needing to find the right language and the right way of getting this message across. Like, how are you going to deliver your message? How proudly are you going to really deliver your message? And so, they want to get to know a person, place, or situation that they really, really, it's so funny. Because they're just so curious about it. Any situation that they're like, I just want to avoid this. I just want to go away from this, move away from this. I just want to withdraw it into a certain shell, into a certain own intellectual library within yourself and in your own psychology and in your own mind. It really, really can be where you move away from, from that situation. Where you move away from that thing that you were so into, that you're so, wrapped up into, that really, really can get the better of you but they want to get to know it. They want to form a deeper relationship with it. And so they ask questions to distract. They want stimulation. They want light. They want the conversation to be light and outgoing and very, very open, very, very sociable, very, very communicative. And they ask questions to lighten up the energy. Like Mars and Gemini seeks to lighten up the energy and seems to sort of take the focus away from the matter at hand. Like they have this ability to, for something to be focused in a certain way and for there to be a certain focus with what is going on. And then they take it away from, what it actually is. What it is doing. Okay. So, they want to ask questions. They want to take the focus somewhere else. They want everyone's minds to go somewhere else with something. And so they really ask these questions like, what is the point of this? What am I going towards? What is going to be achieved out of this? What can be made into the mold and the clay of what it generally does? What can be what makes of this kind of thing? And so they want to shift the energy in the room. They want to shift the attention, because air is one of the insights that I gained from a video that I was watching last night from somebody that whom I follow, is that the element of air, really what it has to do with is how you use your attention, what you put your attention towards and what you feed. Are you really listening? Are you really engaging in that information? Are you really learning it? Are you really learning it? That's the question. That's the thing here. So, with Mars and Gemini, curiosity is really a superpower. Curiosity is a really, really strong strength with Mars and Gemini. And, can you be curious in difficult situations? When it becomes, very, very difficult, can you open up to these things? To these, what's going on? Can you open up to, learning about this situation? Occupying your mind, like, I'm going through the difficult circumstances in the hospital. Oh, how can I, adapt? Can I read some books while I'm in the hospital? Can I watch some shows while I'm in the hospital? Can I talk to somebody that's in the room when I'm in the hospital? So, like, being in the hospital is a really, really dark situation. I know because I was in the hospital for, I think, over 2 weeks, and I found ways of keeping myself occupied through that really, really dark period of my life that never seemed to end, from the end of 2025 into 2026, which actually started January 17th of this year when I got out of the hospital mid-January. So, and then I was ultimately reset from the place that I was. I was a very, very transformed person physically and mentally and psychologically and emotionally from the person that I started when I came into who I ended up being afterward. So, okay. So, they want to be, showing open-mindedness. It's like we don't have to be so stuck in the humdrum. Gemini teaches us that you don't have to be so stuck in the humdrum, very, very negative, wallow in the negativity, wallow in the depression, wallow in the sorrow, wallow in the difficulty of that experience. We can actually open up our minds and explore something and do something different. So, where you're really showing curiosity through adversity is really what it has to do with. Now, Mars in Gemini really is about asking the right questions. Maybe sometimes it's not so much the answer, but it's what kind of questions that you ask. Mars and Gemini is really, really good at phrasing a question and asking a question that's really, really articulate, really, really said out very, very well. Like asking really, really good questions and carrying out and starting and having good intellectual conversation is really what they value and really what they are motivated to experience in this lifetime. And and there is this need to do two things at once. There's this need for, for Gemini to, to really, really do two things at once, to have a sort of scattered understanding of what you're doing. They sort of, as I said, do multiple things at once. They sort of leave, come back, leave again. And, they have a lot of curiosity. They have a lot of flexibility in their midst. And they're very, very, flexible. Gemini is a sign that's open to change. It's a mutable sign. So Mars in Gemini, loses curiosity with really, really getting something done, like, getting a project done, or whatever. If it loses, if that curiosity is not there, if that open-mindedness is not there with what it does and what it commits to and what it decides to put its attention, energy, and focus on, then it will not do it. It just refuses to do something. It just refuses to do something that it just doesn't, the stimulation's not there, the interest's not there, the excitement's not there, with it, the fresh, new qualities of it are not there. They want to always remain curious. They're always looking for new information, new things to learn, new people to talk to, new books to read, new podcasts to listen to, new videos to listen to, new conversations to be had. The thing with Mars and Gemini that I think that if my favorite astrologer, my very, very first astrologer, Deborah Silverman, if she were to come to me and talk to me, say, if you are not stimulated, you are not motivated, and I would totally, wholeheartedly agree. Because you're motivated, when you are stimulated, when your mind is in a good direction, like when your mind is engaged with life, and when you have enough mental stimulation with all the books and all the podcasts and all the, the whatever, you're engaging your mind in, it doesn't have to be just that, just those things, then you are motivated. Then you're really motivated in that sense of the word. So there's that kind of thing going on here. And then, that's what helps them get through the difficult times and projects, is the stimulation, really, really getting through really, really difficult things with curiosity, with absolute curiosity. So, that's what it will be in that case. And, they approach goals. They approach these goals through, being able to, communicate. They approach the goals through being able to speak their mind, speak their truth, and adapt to circumstances which are prone to change, because they're very, very, adaptable. When it comes to change, they're very in that energy of change, and they want change, and they want to create change in their lives, and they want to, do change in their lives, and have, really, having change in their own lives, being able to direct their lives through the energy of change. And so they're all about adapting in this way to life, adapting to circumstances that they have going on that force them and allow them and help them to change. They also look at, information. They look at information, being flexible, flexible information. with flexible, and they need the mental stimulation to keep going. So they use communication combined with information. They sort of combine the best of both worlds. They combine having a lot of information, having a lot of facts and trivias and knowledge about these things, combined with the communication aspect to really get their way with whatever they decide to do. To really have their way into the to the grid of it. That's where they really use their power in that way. They don't want boredom. They cannot stand being bored. When they're bored, they'll just move on. They'll just spontaneously move on. This is not for me. I'm bored. I want to do something else. I want to move on to a new venture. I want to move on to a new book or podcast or whatever. And, they need constant mental stimulation to keep up with their interest and their energy. This constant mental stimulation has to be required. And so they may balance multiple projects into one. They may balance all these multiple areas with these projects, interests or goals. And they may not go goals just going fully in one direction with the goal. They may go in many different types of goals at one time, because that's who they are. They're diverse. They are varied. They are versatile, and they are all that in a bag of chips. So, your knowledge is very valuable. With Mars and Gemini, you have to understand that your knowledge and what you know intellectually and your intelligence is very valuable and a great asset to the world. And I wouldn't say to hold that in. Don't hold in that knowledge. Don't hold in, all, that knowledge of, what is going on, with you. So, they want to be valuable in terms of, their knowledge. But they may end up starting too many projects at once. They may end up starting all these things just at once and not, not finishing them with what they're doing. And this is what they may get into, is starting too many things at once and scattering themselves too far out by these things. And so they're really motivated by variety. They want variety into their lives. They want to have one interest going over here, one interest going over there, and they want their interests to be diverse. They want to be very open-minded and scattered and sort of spread out in terms of their interest. They don't want to be just in one interest, alone, with what they are deciding to do. And so they really like mind games. They're really into mind games with this kind of thing, and opportunities to learn and share information. Like, they need these opportunities to learn all the information they want to gather and learn, because Gemini is a data collector. It gathers all this information, compiles it into these little fragments. And Gemini has all the little fragments of all the little pieces of the information being separate. And Sagittarius puts it all together. Sagittarius puts it together into one thing that's cohesive and forms a truth and a belief and wisdom from that piece of information. That's what Sagittarius does. So, there's opportunities to really look into learning this information really strongly. And so you do best, when managing, multiple interests and projects. At one time, you sort of get bored with one goal. You want multiple things to interest. You may work very ways that you are flexible in, with what you're doing, and that may be really a huge part of you. There may be flexibility in, what you do with your work. And, you may be really just adaptable. Again, you're drawn to sharing information and ideas, whether through making videos or making podcasts, like the one that I'm doing now, where I'm sharing information. openly with you about my personal astrological placement, where they're drawn to any situation where they can share information and ideas, such as a presentation, such as in a conversation, such as to whoever, when it comes to writing, speaking, and teaching, especially. Now, really, really understanding, for those who have Mars and Gemini, that, their words can be used as weapons, and, you do want to be mindful of how you're using your words, that when you get mad, and I don't mean to bruise your egos or anything, and I don't mean to bruise my ego when I say this, but, these, words, to push others' buttons. Using words as, when you get mad, you use words to push others. You use words to get back at others, to try to annoy them or irritate them or get them stirred up and get them riled up and, get them in a very, very mad, infuriated state. And they can also push others' buttons. Also, they can, push others' buttons and really, really, be in control in that kind of way. And that's really how they, operate, is wanting to be in control using their words. They use their words as a source and means of controlling others, controlling what they do, controlling what they say, controlling how they operate in their lives. They can fight with logic and cleverness, using logic, being able to think of the right phrasing to fight and get your way, being able to think of the right thing to say, phrase, sentence, interest, curiosity, just as one-liners that Gemini can really, really invent, using a lot of logic, as I said before, and intellectual prowess with what it communicates, with being able to think in very, very rational ways, with being able to think. They have good battle strategies and battle tactics. They can, I was reading that they can do debate really, really well. So they're great in that. Great in winning over arguments, and they are a tough fighter. They are a tough competitor because they will maybe at times shred you to pieces with their words. They can really, really give you a run for your money when it comes to them using their words, because they have the gift of the gab like nobody's business. As I've said, they have the gift of the gab, and they can really, really use that to their advantage. And there's cleverness as opposed to just reacting, and so they use to being clever, very, very intellectual, as opposed to just reacting in emotional ways. They're very, very smart with what they do, very, very intelligent. They know how to play the game, basically, as opposed to reacting reacting emotionally to all this stuff. That's what they do. And they want to, they don't react, they don't get into emotional fights, they don't tend to give into their emotions or lean too far into their emotions, but they really, really use their words very, very wisely. They gather information very, very well. They're great information gatherers. Finding flaws in arguments. They can really, really find the flaw in, whatever argument they're getting themselves into, with whatever they are choosing to do and choosing to put themselves in. They can really, have this, finding what's wrong with people's arguments, finding what they say in their statements, in their opinions, in their battle tactic and their argument, and find the logical flaws in that argument. Like if somebody argues that, that we should argues for climate change, and there's all these flaws in reducing global warming and doing all these kind of things, but within that there's flaws. It can be where they can really, really look deep into that and find those flaws. And really, they use their communication as a means of, controlling others. They use information. They use, communication to control others, to become better and to be more powerful than others. They want to, they want to feel like they have the power. So the shadows that I want to finish this video off with is knowing when to commit fully into a goal. When to commit fully into, because Gemini has this tendency to not commit to a goal, and knowing when to follow through on a particular goal and commit to it. Just like I said at the beginning of this video, just like I said at the beginning of this episode, committing to that goal as opposed to giving up on that goal and giving up on, those kinds of things. That's really where the thing can go with that, is where they can commit to these things. And then also it's really, really important for Mars and Gemini to not be so brutal and use their words as such weapons to attack to others, but to also consider what they're saying. And is it from love, or is it from a divisive place of wanting to be better, of wanting to be more powerful, of wanting to domineer, of wanting to be having your way, of wanting to get your way with your words, of wanting to be like, oh, I'm so clever, oh, I'm so intelligent with my words, instead of from a place of truth, instead of from a place of love in my heart with what I'm saying. So adding more love and consideration for others in your communication is never a bad thing to say, never a bad thing to consider and implement in your life, as this can help you form healthier relationships with others if you consider your words and you don't damage relationships by saying all these things to irritate others, to offend others, to, hurt others' feelings, to, to really, really, overpower them and, domineer them and, do all this. It's very, very negative with all this stuff. And, where they, don't have enough information to act. There's this constant feeling of like, not having enough information, like not having enough data, not having enough facts gathered, and not being able to act on that information properly. And they can get so caught in the analyzing, in the gathering information, of the sorting out different sources between information and learning that information, that they fail to actually take action and be active and be assertive on a goal that they love, on a goal that they feel very, very strongly about achieving, where it's about having an action and taking action on that goal, instead of just being caught in the information and then just looking at it. So I'm really, really going after what they want, and actually taking action, not just thinking about it, not just reading about it and learning about it, but actually taking action in their lives, where they can make a lot of great, amazing things happen for themselves. Profound things happen where they can empower themselves in that way. So anyway, that's all that I have to say on Mars and Gemini in the birth chart. I hope that you enjoyed this episode of the Cosmic Sky podcast, where I discussed this placement in some depth. I hope that you found a lot of value from this, and if you did, please be sure to, if you're watching on Spotify, I would encourage you to follow this podcast for more and subscribe to my channel so that you do not miss my future uploads. Tomorrow I'll be talking about the Sun in Aries on this podcast, and what that is all about, with what is going on with that, and getting into the characteristics and traits of the Sun in Aries and what that is all about. because I have this placement very, very restorative, very very individualistic placement, wanting to be its own sovereign self, and I'll be talking about that tomorrow's podcast. But anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this, and I love you to be part of this ever-growing community of like-minded, spiritual, and authentic souls. And if you want to be true to who you are, if you want to be spiritual and live a life according to your own integrity and to your own values, then you are in the right place. Take a moment to subscribe to my channel right now, and I will see you, on the next podcast episode.